Kia ora whānau. Today we're here in the understory of the food forest and we're going to be having conversations with Klaus.
Kia ora.
So Klaus, my question for you today to start off with is, how does Syntropy fit into permaculture? How do those things weave and overlap together in a modern context based on where Syntropy kind of originated from and the fundamental principles of permaculture? How do you feel those things weave together?
Well, it's a question that here at PermaDynamics we get asked quite a bit, and there are probably a lot of answers that have come up over the years for that.
I'm sure.
Try to keep it short. Now, Syntropy started with Ernst Götsch in Bahia in the early 80s, and I was lucky to be there in the early days, helping him setting up the farm that he's currently on, as a woofer practically. So I saw the beginnings of it, I saw the early mistakes of it, the almost failures of it, and the whole thing happened in the early 80s, just as permaculture also got momentum. Now the two approaches didn't hear from each other for a long time, partially because Ernst didn't have a telephone for a long time and lived quite remote and so on, and did his own thing. There's certainly a lot of overlaps when it comes to the theory behind food forests. Absolutely. A lot of principles in permaculture cover what Syntropy uses as a principle. However, because of Ernst's amazing amount of experimental knowledge that he built up, because this guy is a maniac working from dawn to dusk every day. He doesn't have holidays or Sundays or anything like that. He has worked on so many different farms, different scenarios, did so much consultant work, focusing always on food forests. Nothing to do with animals, nothing to do with building, all of those things. No, it's just food forest. He built up such a tremendous experience that he came up with strategies that are sorely missing in the permaculture movement. Even so intellectually they might have been covered, but you don't see it in practice. Whereas permaculture, as you have seen, you did a PDC with us, food forest was just less than a day of the 12 days we were teaching, because there's so much else. It's an overall concept of design for every aspect of society, how to make it more sustainable. It includes building, energy production, monetary systems, legal structures, as you have seen in the course. And so there's that. Permaculture is a bigger design approach. Unfortunately, often therefore stays quite static. And the main thing with Syntropy is showing how dynamic food forest needs to be. It needs to be dynamic and not static as frozen in a landscape design that we see often in permaculture.
One of the things that come to mind on listening to you was you brought up your experience and Ernst's experience in Bahia. What were some of the things that you were observing and interacting that were generating the expertise of the likes of Ernst to come in and offer the indigenous peoples of those lands some kind of new normal? What were some of the things that were happening at that time that required Syntropy's support or help?
So first of all, in Bahia, where Ernst has his farm nowadays, sadly there are no indigenous people left. Okay, because it was one of the early places that got colonized by the Portuguese, and the indigenous population was wiped out. Africans were brought in as slaves to work in sugar plantations. They were then trained to work in monocultures, and it was actually very hard to get the message across to the workers he employed to understand the diversity that Ernst wanted to work with. So it was incredibly hard to get the different way of working across. And over the years he found the right workers that actually stayed with him, and later on he gave them land of that farm that he bought with help of other people. he gave them the land for free to stay working there under the condition that they work in Syntropy strategies, which they did anyway because they realized how successful it was. But Ernst learned some part of his techniques, or at least got inspired by working with Maya Indians in Central America that were incredibly sophisticated in how they worked with a forest ecosystem without slash and burn and still managed to crop corn underneath pruned canopies of a native forest. It's totally amazing how they did that. So he got inspiration from that, but then took it into all sort of different ways afterwards. Definitely. He learned through a lot of setbacks. He had really bad land in Bahia, totally contrasting the land that he worked before in Central America, which was deep volcanic. His land in Bahia is very weathered clay, very poor in especially phosphorus and so on. Very low pH we had there, between 4 and 5. Initially nothing worked. It was heartbreaking. All these what we would call like normal permaculture strategies of slash and drop and mulching and planting different layers and so on, it just wasn't enough. It didn't work, and we would see leafcutter ants taking most of our plants away overnight. And then first Ernst, he didn't want to use poison on the ants as everybody else did, so he started using slaked lime to blow into their nests to kill the fungus that they create in order to starve them, and it worked. But it was not the root cause, it was just fighting the symptoms.
Yeah.
So he understood that, and then because he couldn't control them anyway with that, they kept coming back.
Yeah.
Then he tried to understand what plants did these leafcutter ants prune and which ones did they leave in peace. And he saw, well, they're not stupid. They're not going to destroy the ecosystem for themselves to starve. So what are they trying to achieve? And then he realized, okay, maybe the citrus tree that we planted, the place wasn't ready for it yet, and that's why the ants are taking it down. So maybe we need to allow for the plants that the leafcutter ants are not touching, and need to let them do the job first before we think of planting citrus in here. And that led him to the understanding of his concept of succession cycles in the form of what we see in the succession model, which is very interesting to work with. You know, the triangle, the accumulation system versus the abundance system. We come in with plants from the abundance system and force it onto an accumulation scenario when the place, the soil, the microbes, nothing is ready yet to take those abundant plants, and they just die or get eaten by insects, right? So he understood that and understood what plants he needed to work with in order to make the place ready for the plants we wanted. So the ants became his teacher, and once he did that right, the ants just disappeared.
Wow.
Right? And that's so amazing.
Wow,
and you see that with all other insects, the same thing. It's just sometimes harder to understand that. And we need to let go of our drive to control things all the time and let things happen and just try to understand it and direct it to some degree. But we need to get away from trying to control everything. I think that's the main message here.
What's come to mind, Klaus, is how as humans we can actually be positive members of this ecosystem, of this food forest establishment, of this land regeneration kaupapa that you're very much passionate about. When we observe, when we interact, when we become a part of that ecosystem, we then see ourselves as the sun, the wind, the water, the fundamental elements that nature very much expresses herself to be at times. The wind, for example, we might get crazy winds. We might have a cyclone or something will come in, and that'll express itself in a way that might fell a tree, or it might snap branches, or it self-prunes the ngahere, the food forest. When we come in, we basically replicating nature, and that enables us or shows us how we can be a co-member, a positive member of that system in terms of how we manage those things. Would you be able to extend on that?
Yeah, good point, Sean. And yeah, I mean, even considering the wind as being some influence that is a dynamic that we need. First of all, the ecosystem or our food forest ecosystem has intelligence. Yeah, nowadays we are so focused on. We talk a lot about AI, artificial intelligence, and we forget BI, the biological intelligence, or we look at it as something inferior because it has been around so long and now we have something better or whatever. But this planet is run by biological intelligence, and we are part of that intelligence. We are not the intelligent ones that want to run the show. I mean, we want to run the show, but we will never manage that, at least not in a peaceful, functional way. So there are also intelligences at play that we often don't understand. And you mentioned the wind. One of the big breakthroughs in Ernst's understanding was the effect that a hurricane had in his early plantations, when it was devastating. Everything, top canopy was broken and fell on the cocoa trees and this and that, and he saw that was the last thing he needed now when he was already struggling. But then there was a bumper crop, and then he realized that this heavy pruning created this regrowth burst, and all the litter fed the production of a bumper crop of cocoa. Right? Now in our food forests we imitate that pruning that a storm does, or you've seen it when we go in and do a maintenance. It looks like there was a tornado that went through. Yeah? It looks brutal. It's not landscaping what we're doing here. It's food forest management in the Syntropy style. So what we do is we take off limbs of trees that in a storm would break. Yeah? Or we take off branches that get too much shade, and these are often the branches that would get affected by what we hear now by cicadas cutting into them, or by purrimos ring barking them. We see that again and again, that insects usually target branches that actually are branches that we would prune back. The reason for that is that branches that we would prune back are often in the wrong place. They conflict with others, therefore don't get the sun that they need. That means they don't have the defenses against these insects, and insects can sense that, and they attack those branches in order to shorten their life and bring them down to the ground to be recycled to feed the branches that are in the right place. So now when we tap into that biological intelligence, we can do a bit more of a cleaner management with our machetes, our saws. That is where our biological intelligence as humans, tool makers, comes in. We can do a faster, cleaner job than insects would do. So we might have fruit trees that if we would leave it to the wind, they would split in the middle and then it would get infected by a fungus, and that's it. Now there's maybe a 20-year-old cherimoya tree gone or something like that. In nature, not a problem. Overall, it's fine. But as humans, we have a bit of a greedy factor in us, and we want the fruit to be sold and pay bills and so on. So we do want to get a good production out of the system, but at the same time work in line with biological intelligence. So we do a clean cut before the wind breaks the tree apart. We use secateurs instead of letting cicada do the job for us, because we can do it in a way that brings more production about, which nature is often not so concerned about. But, well, we are humans in the end.
What that leads me towards, Klaus, is how not only Syntropy is such an abundant method in regenerating marginal land, but how Syntropy might support us in generating an income and being that positive member and influence on lands as such that we prominently have in Te Tai Tokoro, Northland, New Zealand. You know, we see these lands being farmed, you know, generally by dairy, and what would you say would be some of your observations and experiences in observing our situation scenarios in Northland, and how you see this context rippling out throughout Te Tai Tokerau and supporting communities, whānaus, family to generate income from often we see as marginal land?
Yeah, Sean, it's not just here in Northland where we see all these marginal wastelands that have gone from bush to farmland to wastelands, yeah. But what we look at when we see wasteland is often a type of vegetation that is regenerating the place, like here in our case, gorse, tobacco, wheat, pampa grass, and so on. It is on its way to improvement. These plants are healing. Often very little acknowledgement goes to them. And you can see that all around the world. Farming leaves deserts in its footprints of various degrees. And poor people, they might have access to these wastelands. They don't touch them because for how they work, the culture that they have from first working with good land and then it got depleted, and then these techniques don't work anymore to bring these soils back to life again, then they abandon them because the amount of inputs it takes to get profit from it is too low for even poor people to touch them.
Yeah.
So best case scenario, they put some goats on it. And the great thing about Syntropy is it is an incredibly successful tool to bring life back into any abused landscape. And every agricultural landscape, or at least 99% of our agricultural land, needs regeneration. There's just no doubt about it. Organic matters have been depleted, soil structure is gone, and crops are only kept alive with all these agrochemical inputs. Yeah. Now, Syntropy doesn't depend on those. It depends on skills of the farmer, understanding, observation, dedication, management on time, elbow grease, right, and dropping entitlements.
Yeah.
And really going for it as if our life depends on it, which it does. Now, how can we be part of that? Is exactly that. Just be part of it, observe, interact, as in permaculture. But interaction means really bringing yourself in and doing the best for the piece of land. Syntropy is about enhancing life. Entropy, which is practiced in industrial agriculture around the globe, is to reduce life, bring it from diversity to monoculture to desert. That's entropy. Syntropy is the opposite of that, is enhancing life. That's what life wants to do, complexify, innovate, and play, and produce beauty and health and us included, right? We are part of that.
Absolutely.
And what is our function? I would say, like Charles Eisenstein phrased it, what's the function of humans is to enhance life and create beauty. Well, that's what we're doing in Syntropy, all right? And when you do that on a daily basis, you live in that syntropic system as you do, and you eat from that syntropy system as you do, you feel like it somehow takes you in, it embraces you, and it takes you along, and suddenly you're not the sort of top-down boss over the land. You are suddenly a member that runs along and wants to play along and wants to be part of it, and you get the feedback that you're welcome, right? Isn't it?
Oh my God, amazing.
So yeah, that's quite infectious, and it can take over you, and in a good way. I love it.
Yeah.